20 minutes of fuel left at 30,000 feet, and the only person who knew how to save everyone was a 16-year-old boy who had never flown a plane in his life. This is the true story of how a terrified teenager became the youngest person to ever talk down a commercial aircraft, and how one catastrophic moment changed aviation safety forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. The morning of June 10th started like any other Tuesday for James Harrison. He woke up at 6:30, ate breakfast with his mom, and packed his backpack for the flight to Seattle. His father had promised him this trip for months. They were going to visit Boeing's factory, tour the Museum of Flight, and spend quality time together. James had been obsessed with aviation since he was 8 years old. His bedroom walls were covered with posters of aircraft. He knew the specifications of every major passenger jet by heart. He had spent countless hours on flight simulator games, learning the controls, the instruments, the procedures. But it was all just a hobby, just a dream. He never imagined that in a few hours, those simulations would be the only thing standing between 237 people and disaster. They arrived at the airport at 9:15. His father, Captain Michael Harrison, was not just a passenger on this flight. He was the pilot, the captain. James felt proud walking through the terminal beside him, watching other crew members nod respectfully as they passed. His father had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years. He had logged over 15,000 flight hours. He was calm, experienced, unshakable. They boarded early and James took his seat in row 12. His father disappeared into the cockpit. The passengers filed in slowly, families with young children, business travelers typing on laptops, an elderly couple holding hands. Nobody knew what was coming. The flight took off at 11:45, right on schedule. James looked out the window as the ground fell away beneath them. The city became a patchwork of roads and buildings, then vanished entirely as they climbed into the clouds. He pulled out his tablet and started reading about the aircraft they were flying on. It was an Airbus A320, maximum range of 3,300 nautical miles, cruising speed of 511 miles per hour, seating capacity of 180, though today the flight was fully booked. James knew every detail. He had studied this plane dozens of times, but knowing facts and flying an actual aircraft were two completely different things. 40 minutes into the flight, James noticed one of the flight attendants moving quickly toward the front of the cabin. Her face was tense. She knocked on the cockpit door and waited. A moment later, the door opened just a crack, and she slipped inside. James felt a small knot form in his stomach. Something was wrong. He tried to push the thought away. Flight attendants went in and out of the cockpit all the time. It was normal. But the way she had moved, the expression on her face, it did not feel normal. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The flight attendant had not come back out. James looked around the cabin. Most passengers were asleep or distracted. Nobody else seemed to notice. Then the intercom clicked on. It was not his father's voice. It was the first officer. Her voice was calm, but James could hear something underneath it. Stress. Fear. She said there was a minor technical issue, and they might experience some turbulence. She asked everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. The intercom clicked off. James's heart started pounding. His father always made the announcements. Always. Why had the first officer spoken instead? He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. A flight attendant immediately approached him. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She told him to sit down. James said he needed to check on his father. The flight attendant hesitated. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back at James. She told him everything was fine. But James knew she was lying. He pushed past her and walked toward the front of the plane. Another flight attendant stepped in front of him, blocking his path. She was older, more authoritative. She told him firmly to return to his seat. James looked her in the eye and said his father was the captain of this flight, and he needed to see him right now. The woman's expression changed. She leaned in close and whispered that his father was unconscious. The world seemed to tilt. James felt his legs go weak. He grabbed the back of a seat to steady himself. The flight attendant told him his father had collapsed 20 minutes ago. They had tried everything to wake him up. The first officer was flying the plane alone, but now she was feeling sick too. Dizzy, nauseous. Disoriented, they did not know what was wrong. Carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe. A malfunction in the air circulation system. Whatever it was affecting everyone in the cockpit. The flight attendant said they had already radioed for help. Air traffic control was trying to find a solution. But James could see the panic in her eyes. She did not believe there was a solution. James pushed past her and ran to the cockpit door. He pounded on it with his fist. A weak voice from inside told him to wait. He heard movement, a thud, and then the door unlocked. James pulled it open and stepped inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. His father was slumped in the captain's seat, unconscious, his head tilted to one side. The first officer was pale and sweating, gripping the controls with trembling hands. She looked at James and tried to smile. She said she could hold on a little longer, but even as she spoke, her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward onto the yoke. The aircraft lurched violently to the left. Alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed across the instrument panel. James lunged forward and grabbed the first officer, pulling her back into her seat. The plane was descending. Fast. He could feel the angle of the floor shifting beneath his feet. Passengers were screaming in the cabin behind him. James looked at the altimeter. They were dropping through 28,000 feet. He had maybe 2 minutes before they lost too much altitude to recover. Maybe less. He slid into the empty jump seat behind the captain's chair and stared at the controls. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely move. He had flown this exact scenario 100 times in his simulator. But this was not a game. This was real. 237 people were depending on him. His father was unconscious beside him, and he was 16 years old. He reached forward and grabbed the radio handset. His voice cracked as he spoke. He said his name was James Harrison. He was a passenger, and both pilots were unconscious. He said he needed help, right now. The response came back immediately. The voice on the other end was calm and steady. It belonged to a man named Captain Richard Stone, an air traffic controller and former military pilot. He told James to take a deep breath. He said James was going to be okay. He said they were going to do this together. Stone asked James if he had any flight experience. James said he had flown simulators, hundreds of hours. Stone paused for just a second, then said that was good. That was going to be enough. He told James to look at the controls and describe what he saw. James forced himself to focus. He described the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the artificial horizon. Stone told him to gently pull back on the yoke. Just a little. Ease the plane back to level flight. James wrapped both hands around the control column and pulled. The plane responded sluggishly at first, then began to level out. The descent slowed. The alarm stopped screaming. James felt a surge of relief so intense he almost cried. Stone told him he did great. He said the hard part was over. But James knew that was not true. The hard part was just beginning. Stone walked James through stabilizing the aircraft. They brought it back to 28,000 feet and leveled off. Stone explained that the autopilot had disengaged when the first officer collapsed onto the controls. James needed to re-engage it. Stone guided him through the steps, telling him which buttons to press, which switches to flip. James's hands were still shaking, but he followed every instruction exactly. The autopilot engaged with a soft beep. The plane steadied. For the first time in 10 minutes, James allowed himself to breathe. But then Stone said something that made James's stomach drop. He said they had another problem. A big one. The plane was running low on fuel. The first officer had been too disoriented to notice, but they had been burning fuel at an accelerated rate for the past 40 minutes. Stone estimated they had maybe 20 minutes of flight time left. Maybe less. They needed to land immediately. The nearest airport was 30 miles away, but it was a small regional airfield with a short runway. Landing an Airbus A320 there would be difficult even for an experienced pilot. For James it would be nearly impossible. Stone asked James if he understood. James said yes. Stone asked if he was ready. James looked at his father's unconscious face, then at the instrument panel, then out the windscreen at the endless sky. He said he did not have a choice. Stone said that was the right answer. He said they were going to bring this plane down safely. He said James was not alone. There were a dozen people on the ground working with him. Engineers, pilots, air traffic controllers. Everyone was focused on getting him and his passengers home. Stone began walking James through the descent procedure. He told him to disengage the autopilot. James hesitated, his finger hovering over the button. Once he turned it off, he would be flying manually. No computer assistance, no safety net. He pressed the button. The plane was his now. Stone told him to reduce the throttle gradually. James found the throttle levers and eased them back. The engines quieted. The plane began to descend. Stone told him to watch his airspeed. Too fast and the plane could become unstable. Too slow and they would stall. James kept his eyes locked on the instruments, making tiny adjustments, feeling the aircraft respond to every input. The ground was getting closer. James could see fields and roads and houses. The airport was ahead, a single runway cutting through farmland. Stone told him to lower the landing gear. James found the switch and flipped it. There was a loud mechanical groan as the wheels extended. 3 green lights appeared on the panel. Gear down and locked. Stone told him to deploy the flaps. James moved the flap lever. The plane shuddered slightly as the flaps extended, increasing drag and slowing the aircraft. Stone said he was doing great. He said to keep the nose up and maintain his glide slope. James was sweating now. His shirt was soaked through. His vision was tunneling. He forced himself to stay focused. The runway was rushing up toward them. Stone told him he was coming in too fast. He needed to reduce speed. James pulled back the throttle more. The plane slowed. Stone said that was good. He said to keep the wings level. James made a tiny adjustment to the yoke. The wings leveled out. The runway filled the windscreen. Stone told him to start the flare, to pull back gently on the yoke as he crossed the threshold. James pulled back. The nose lifted. The plane seemed to float for a moment, suspended between sky and earth. Then the wheels touched down hard. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then slammed back onto the runway. James jammed his feet onto the pedals, trying to remember which one was the brake. The plane was rolling fast, eating up runway. He found the brake pedal and pressed down hard. Too hard. The plane lurched and skidded. He eased off slightly, applying steady pressure. The aircraft began to slow. The end of the runway was coming up fast. James pressed harder on the brakes. The plane shuddered and groaned. And then, with maybe 50 feet of runway left, it stopped. James sat frozen in the captain's seat, his hands still gripping the yoke. He could not move, could not think. The cockpit was silent except for the ticking of cooling engines. Then he heard sirens. Emergency vehicles were racing toward the plane. The cockpit door burst open and paramedics rushed in. They went straight to his father and the first officer, checking vitals, administering oxygen. Someone put a hand on James's shoulder and asked if he was okay. James nodded, but he could not speak. His entire body was shaking. His father and the first officer were rushed to the hospital. Tests revealed they had been exposed to toxic fumes from a malfunctioning heating system in the cockpit. They both made full recoveries. Every single passenger walked away without serious injury. The only damage to the aircraft was a blown tire from James's hard landing. Investigators later called it a miracle. But the people who had listened to the radio transmissions knew it was not a miracle. It was the result of a terrified 16-year-old boy who refused to give up. The story spread quickly. News outlets around the world covered it. James was called a hero. He was invited to speak at aviation conferences. The FAA used his case to update their emergency protocols. Airlines overhauled their cockpit air circulation systems. His father returned to flying 6 months later. He told James he was proud of him. Not because he had landed the plane, but because he had stayed calm when everything around him was falling apart. James never wanted to be famous. He just wanted his father to wake up. He wanted everyone on that plane to get home safely. And because he had spent years learning about something he loved, because he had taken his hobby seriously, he was able to do something that should have been impossible. He proved that knowledge and courage can appear in the most unexpected places, that heroes are not always the ones wearing uniforms. Sometimes they are just kids who refuse to let fear win. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.